Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight.
From Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and the palatial FYC studios, you're listening to For Your Consideration,
the podcast featuring roundtable discussions, re-evaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm your host, Dustin.
And I'm your host, Mike. And a hearty hello to all of our listeners who are catching the show through YouTube, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or any of the dozens of other great podcast providers. Also, if you're catching the show off of iTunes, as many people do, while you're there, we'd encourage you to rate and review the show, because it really helps us out, and it helps get us into the eyes and ears of potential listeners, ensuring, of course, that the show goes on.
The show must go on.
If you're a regular listener, welcome back. Good to see you. If you're new to the show, before we get into the discussion, we just have to warn you, spoilers ahead.
Trying something new today.
What?
You're trying something new.
I just forgot the way I normally said it.
Switching it up is good, though.
And speaking of switching it up, we're switching it up a little bit this week in the sense that the film that we're talking about doesn't actually appear on the Sight and Sound list, which has kind of been our de facto list for some time. But it does appear on the AFI list, so while it's a slight departure from perhaps what we're used to, it is kind of a return to basics. So the film that we're going to be talking about this week is the 1973 George Lucas Nostalgia Fest, American Graffiti.
AKA that movie about driving up and down the same old strip. They gotta find a new place where the kids are hip.
This is a movie that's kind of been on my mind for a while. You know, Star Wars was kind of a go-to. It's something that everybody has seen and everybody has thoughts on. Not a lot of people talk about American Graffiti, and it was on that AFI list, so it just kind of planted itself. It's just been floating around back there, and I wanted to go a little bit lighter, because a lot of the stuff we've been covering lately has been kind of heavy, or
I don't know what you're talking about.
At the very least, a little awkward. So I thought comedy, and something I haven't seen in a while. So yeah, I was excited to take another look at it. But before we roll credits on the movie, perhaps Dustin, you would like to talk about our new sponsor.
That is the most awkward segue we've had yet so far with that.
I think this episode's going to be full of awkward segues.
But if you want to help support the show, another way to do that is to head over to audibletrial.com/FYC show. And if you sign yourself up for a free trial, you can get yourself an audiobook that you can keep afterwards, regardless of whether or not you stick with them. But it'll help support us. Keep the lights on, as Mike always says.
It's a 30-day free trial, no commitment, helps us out. I don't see the bad side to this. Unless you've already got an account and you can't get another one.
In which case, we're wasting your time over and over.
So with that out of the way, let us roll credits on American Graffiti.
Graffiti, as it were.
Which is mildly amusing because David Fincher has cited American Graffiti as an influence on Fight Club. So the film was directed by George Lucas, produced by Francis Ford Coppola. It was written by George Lucas, Gloria Katz, and Willard Hayek. It starred Richard Dreyfuss, Ron Howard, Paul Le Mat, Charles Martin Smith, Candy Clark, Mackenzie Phillips, Cindy Williams, and Wolfman Jack. Cinematography was by... Wow! Cinematography was by two gentlemen whose names, for a change, I might be butchering. Ron Eveslage and Jan Dalquin? I wasn't expecting that. Edited by Verna Fields and Marcia Lucas. Distributed by Universal Pictures and received a wide release in the United States on August 11th, 1973. Mere weeks before I, dear listener, was born.
And yet somehow it's a nostalgia fest for him. I don't understand how.
Well, it's not a nostalgia fest for me. It's a nostalgia fest for the people who lived in that time. But you forget, Dustin, I'm a history major.
How's that working out for you?
You had to go there. I'm podcasting, man.
Says the philosophy major who doesn't even have a degree in it.
So American Graffiti was very well received by critics and by audiences. It's actually one of the movies for a long time that had the greatest sort of cost-profit ratios, much like Halloween. Roger Ebert said it was not only a great movie, but a brilliant work of historical fiction. And Jay Cox of Time magazine wrote, that the film reveals a new and welcome depth of feeling. Few films have shown quite so well the eagerness, the sadness, the ambitions, and small defeats of a generation of young Americans. And it features on the AFI Top 100 list at
62, apparently.
62. Originally, it was at 77 when they reshuffled. I think it was in 2000, 2002, 2010.
It's getting harder to find these lists sometimes.
AFI
got so many versions.
AFI did a reshuffling, and they came up with a new list, and American Graffiti bumped up to 62 from 77. Strangely, The Sixth Sense remains on the list.
Nobody can be perfect, I guess.
I do want to revisit that movie. I don't know if anybody wants to hear us revisit that movie, but I kind of feel like...
We have to do an audio commentary at some point.
Ooh. There's an idea. This is why I keep you around.
It's not just my good looks, which does so well on a podcast. They've always said I have a face for radio.
So, Dustin, as is our tradition, as is our idiom, our way, how did you feel about the film American Graffiti?
The second you said our way, all I heard was Frank Sinatra singing...
My Way?
My Way, exactly. And now it's Limp Bizkit, My Way or the Highway.
Your
Bon Jovi, it's just all over. Every song that has it. Honestly, I had low expectations going into this movie because I was told effectively that it is a nostalgia trip for a period of time that I don't really care for and an age demographic of people that I just don't really relate to. So I have very low expectations. As far as the plot's concerned, it was literally like a Beach Boys song. They were driving up and down the same old strip. The one guy wondering about whether or not he should go to a new place where the kids are hip. You got the one guy where the bad guys knew him and they left him alone. It's a Beach Boys song, which is amusing because in the movie, when the Beach Boys came on, it was shut off immediately.
It's a slice of life. It's a night in the life of these kids who are facing, and I use the word kids lightly in the case of some of the actors cast in this film. But it is a night in the life of these kids who are facing a big change in their lives.
Well, for some of them, it wasn't a change at all. A couple were just like, well, I'm going to stick around here. That's what I'm going to do. The real decision was between two characters. One who was happy to leave and told his girlfriend that, yeah, we're in an open relationship now. And so his main struggle was that he's a complete turd and doesn't understand why she's so upset with him. He comes around at the end when she nearly dies, but I don't know why she bothers sticking out with this guy. He was violent and angry when it came to her saying, no, I don't want to dance, or when she didn't want to have sex in the back of his car.
I think violence may be a strong word, but...
When you start shouting angrily...
But it was written this way, and I thought Ron Howard actually played it surprisingly well. I mean, he's so often viewed as a very meat and potatoes kind of nice guy sort of character. I kind of expected to see Richie Cunningham from Happy Days in this movie, and Steve's kind of a dick. He's kind of an entitled prick. He's going off to school, and he's big man, in the high school. He's the one that everybody most likely to achieve kind of thing. And his friend Kurt, played by Richard Dreyfuss, is kind of the other side of that coin, where he's just as intelligent and he's just as able to go to the schools and maneuver through the same sort of social strata as Steve, but he's, I think, a little bit deeper. He's got a little bit more going on, and his conundrum, of course, is, do I want to leave? Why do I want to leave? What am I going to? Steve thinks you have to leave. It's just, we got to get out of here. We got to go somewhere bigger because we're important and we're awesome. And he gets the idea that, yeah, let's have an open relationship, which puts Cindy Williams into kind of a state of frustration and...
Well, it's certainly extraordinarily upsetting when somebody's just like, yeah, it's going to make us stronger when I bang other chicks.
It's such a classic move. One of the things that I loved about this movie was that you had the nice characters, you had the nerdy characters, you had the dumb characters, the mean characters. Everybody was in there, and everyone played the roles. They were written so well, and they were performed so genuinely. Like, at no point did Cindy's character, Lori, feel sort of vulnerable in the sense that she was just going to go along with everything. I mean, she had her opinion, she made her opinion known, and she sort of stood up for herself, which kind of impressed me. I mean, sure, this is a period where the roles of men and women, boys and girls, there is a certain sort of dynamic, a certain sort of social...
Oh, and I'll be getting into that.
And, I'm in no way surprised by kind of how the characters sort of bounce back together and sort of the way that they either stick together or defy each other. But I think there's an honesty to it. I don't feel like it's put on. I don't feel like it's theatrical. I feel like everything is coming from a very real place. And I'll grant you, this is George Lucas's life. This is George Lucas's remembrances, as well as writers Gloria Katz and Willard Hayek. They grew up in a very middle-class, suburban, white California world, and going into this movie, watching it again, I was kind of aware of this, and I was wondering how it was going to play out. Remembering back to my childhood, there were no POC, there were no people of color in my school until, I think, grade 10? I was in high school, the middle of high school, when we got our first black student, and there was only one in, like, the entire high school, because that's how it
rolls when
it
you're
was.
in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, and, as time goes on and as immigration continues and opens up and more people come in and, things diversified actually quite quickly. But looking at this movie now, I don't look at it and think like, where are the African-American characters? Where are the, Chinese-American characters or Japanese-American or anybody of any other race or color?
Whereas when I see it, I wasn't thinking about people of color at all. I was thinking, wow, these guys are a bunch of assholes. Tooling up and down the strip, picking up chicks in the most inappropriate of ways. And, like, as you said, whenever I would complain about something somebody was doing, you'd say it was a different time then. And all I can think of is some old guy thinking, I remember back in the day when you wanted to pick up a chick, you just drove your car up and you said, hey, you're a hottie, and just shout out at them. And nowadays you do that and you end up on a YouTube page and it's harassment. And yeah, it's like, wow, this is... Everything everyone does is so inappropriate this whole time. The younger sister, who's 14?
I think she's 14, yeah.
Her older sister lets her get out of the car and go drive around with this random old guy who's specifically trying to pick up chicks. Like, that is sketchy as hell.
Who's probably 17 or 18 at the time.
Luckily, he's a pretty decent guy, but I mean, really, like, at one point he kicks her out and there's 3 guys just hooting and hollering at her, driving really slowly up next to her. Like, this is super sketchy. And this movie takes place, like, between the hours of 11 at night and dawn. And nobody seems to be concerned with the fact that she's out around the strip where apparently you have murderous gangs running around threatening to drag people behind the back of their vehicle. That was the only time I actually thought of people of color, because it's like, wow, that's a KKK move right there.
Actually, I think there was an Hispanic person in the Pharaohs.
There was.
So there actually was.
So well represented.
I think, again, probably appropriate for the time. Yeah, I don't know about you. I mean, I'm like 10 years older than you. I don't know if my childhood experience is that much different from yours, but there was a much safer sort of feeling. There was, like, I'm watching this movie and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I could see us doing that when we were teenagers, particularly if you are driving around with the kids in your town or from your school or, schools nearby that you may be familiar with. That's not to say that shitty things didn't happen. But again, I think this is a very honest portrayal of the period and the activity.
Though to say that it's safe when they dramatize it by having A, the gang, B, the creepers, the fact that the guy's car is stolen and there's the fight there, the robbery, the 2 robberies actually that take place, plus the hooking up the axle of the police car to a pole of some sort, just that doesn't exactly paint a picture of, oh, hey, remember when things used to be safe? Like, that would be extreme for these dangerous times now over the course of a week. You don't have that much stuff going on.
But it was a different time, and there was less stranger danger. I mean...
Which is ridiculous as it is, because 90% of kidnappings or assaults are going to be friends, which is a horrible thing on its own.
And so far away from the discussion of this film. One of the things that really impressed me about the movie was the look of it. I've often said that I don't think much of Lucas as a director, but watching this movie, I feel like he's making all the right choices visually. I feel like the places that they're choosing to shoot, it was super low budget. They made this movie for less than $1 million. I think they had 28 days to shoot it or something. So it was like pretty guerrilla for the time. So they probably didn't have a lot of opportunities to, get some fancy looking school or dress it up for the sock hop. But I kind of don't think they would have, even if they did have the money, because, listening to Lucas talk about the movie, he talked about the way that they approached the sound and the way that they approached the lighting, and they very much wanted to give it a very real feeling. I feel like the dance in the gymnasium, it felt super genuine and real to me. The driving around, the actual cruising itself.
That is the kind of dancing, actually, that I'd like to learn. Like, that looks like fun dancing.
But it wasn't even like good dancing necessarily. Like there were some kids who knew the dances, and there were some kids who were just kind of like moving, and they were awkward, and the gym didn't look super fancy.
That's fine and dandy, but it seems like dancing was a bit more fun back in the day. Even when there was just silly, the twist sort of moves.
So I was super impressed with the actual direction of the film. And honestly, even the script, like, I thought the characters were well-rounded. I thought
Toad is not well-rounded.
Like some of the best slice-of-life movies. I mean, this reminded me of Dazed and Confused. This reminded me of... I know I had one more nostalgia movie in my head, and I can't remember what it is now. And even though it runs just over 2 hours, I know you probably felt the running time a lot more acutely than I did, but
once I realized there was no actual plot going to happen, it was much easy. The running time was much less of an issue.
It's definitely a character piece. It focuses way more on character than it does on
like the character of Toad, who lies to a chick to try to have sex with her in his friend's car, who it gets stolen, and his friend somehow is not suspicious of that when he finds him later on, and they're talking about how they got their car stolen.
He's kind of preoccupied.
He's thinking
of Lori. He's thinking of college.
His first question was, "Hey, where's my car?"
But Toad also says,
it's in the garage."
He says it's in the garage. And he's like, well, that's a good place for it, because the garage is a safe place.
And then you got the other car that you never actually have. None of this is suspicious. Not you freaking out about how you were robbed. None of it's suspicious at all. And of course, the girl forgives him for having lied to her the whole night and tried to sleep with her under false pretenses. It was a different time. That's what I keep hearing. I will, now to compliment the movie, the sound direction was phenomenal in this movie. They had just sort of hits of the day going on the radio with Wolfman Jack sort of interspersed, and it was always there, and you could always notice it, but it was never overpowering anything else. You never thought, turn down the radio because I can't hear what you guys are saying. It gave a very good tone to the film.
There's no score. It's all source music.
And it's all basically the same radio station. As you were saying, everybody used to just listen to Wolfman Jack. And that was perfect. Like, I could not say better things about how they did the sound in this movie. That was fantastically done.
Part of the use of the Wolfman Jack, I mean, you listened to the radio while you were cruising, and Lucas said, there was this personality, this DJ on the other end of the radio, who you felt was part of your life. You felt like you were friends with them. You felt like you had a relationship with them because you listened to them constantly, and they were a constant presence in your life, but you've most likely never seen them, like not even a picture of them. They're just this ethereal, voice in the night. And he wanted the Wolfman Jack character to basically be that. And that's why it was played for so much kind of mystery at the end there, when Kurt sort of wanders in to make his dedication or request for the woman and the girl in the white T-bird. But I thought it played it really well into the sort of overall narrative, and it kind of gave Kurt sort of somewhere to go. And like you said, it underscored everything really, really nicely, so that when they were cutting to just sort of scenes of the cruising, or they were just driving around, there was always sort of something going on.
The one thing that did bug me a lot was Harrison Ford. At first, he's driving around looking to race. He's got a girl in his arm, and she's there looking to be there with him as they race. Where the hell did she go? She just disappeared when Lori had to basically storm off and go into this random guy's car, pretty much to set it up. I think that, if anything, was a bit of poor writing. That, or just more proof that Harrison Ford was a very skeevy guy in that movie.
Oh, I'm pretty sure Bob Falfa was kind of skeezy, but I haven't had a chance to do a lot of research sort of post-viewing, but I do recall reading somewhere or hearing somewhere that there was a bunch of stuff that was cut from the script. At least the script. It might have even been shot and cut from the film, just kind of for time and cost. So it's very possible that at some point there was a scene where Falfa and the girl on his arm, part ways.
And like basically every guy in this movie, he immediately tries to find another chick. That's what the teens are up to, from what I hear. And honestly, that's what I hear that they were up to when I was younger, but...
That's what the cruising was for, man. You're talking about people who live in suburbia. They're spread out, other than like school or the drive-through, the diner. Those are your like two kind of daytime meeting places, and then you cruised at night, and you cruised around with your friends, and these were post-war boomer kids, and they had some disposable income, they had cars, and they drove around, and they looked for the boy or the girl of their dreams.
Though if it is just literally that one strip, when they took all the air out of the tires and foamed up that one car, I'm surprised they didn't have another scene of them driving past it again all sheepishly like, oh geez, maybe we should just turn left over here.
That actually would have been pretty cool. I would have liked to have seen that. You know what, I'm guessing had they had more time and more of a budget, they might have done that just for sort of the gag quality of it. Even if the car was empty, to just drive by and see the car still sitting there, or getting like hooked up to a tow truck or something. Or somebody out there with a bike pump trying to get the tires going.
Just, innocent little slice of life nostalgia.
It's funny you mentioned Bob Falfa, you mentioned Harrison Ford. For somebody who is out of the cast, you'd probably, out of anybody else that's in there, you might be, whoa, Harrison Ford is in this movie. But interestingly enough, he's kind of the worst actor in the movie. Like, everybody else genuinely inhabits their role, whereas Harrison Ford's just like, hey, I'm looking for somebody to drag race with, and he's the most sort of theatrical character of them all, and I actually found that a little bit disappointing.
Well, I've actually never really seen Harrison Ford giving much range as an actor. I pretty much know him as indies and as solo, so
you haven't seen...
It pretty much fits the same thing, so...
The Mosquito Coast...
I have not even heard of that.
You haven't seen Presumed Innocent?
I have not.
You haven't seen The Fugitive?
I have not.
Wow. I thought The Fugitive would be the one you would be most likely to see.
There's a fun list of movies I have not seen that runs really weird with the fact that we do this podcast.
Well, considering how many movies you tend to watch, I'm often surprised to find out some of the most common films. Although I'm still getting shit from people that I haven't seen Wall-E. It's like, what?
There's a lot of films out there, true story.
It's like, I'm sorry, I gotta watch American Graffiti again. I got a podcast, man. Although Wall-E is on the list. We are going to do Wall-E at some point. So for anybody who's listening,
there's something to look forward to.
Who wants to give me shit for not seeing Wall-E.
I believe I'm the one who has the more egregious stuff, though, on his list of haven't seens. And the more weird-ass shit from other countries or underground nonsense.
One thing we both found kind of amusing, when Bo Hopkins comes on screen, he plays the leader of the Pharaoh's gang. And I think we both kind of had the reaction, but you vocalized it much like I did when we were watching Triangle, and I saw Liam Hemsworth.
How old is this guy?
I don't know how old Bo Hopkins looked when he was, 18 or 20 years old. I guess at that time, in 1972 or 73, when they were making the movie, he was like 30. So, I mean, he was still skewing probably 10 years older than who his character was, but
he looked like he was in his early or mid 40s.
I know. I was expecting him to start doing some like action hero shit or something, because
he looked like he belonged in a Western, really.
He was like everyone's dad. And he just decided to do some crime on the side.
Robbing an arcade. Speaking of crime and money, the one thing that I remember thinking, that old man voice talking about nostalgia, how things were back in the day. The one thing that hasn't changed, scholarships still only pay out $2,000. When they said it was $2,000, I was like, that's how much I got for a scholarship. Screw you.
There are many different scholarships of many different levels.
There are, and I looked into a whole lot of them, and the average range nowadays...
You were that bitter that you looked into it?
No. When I was in college, I was looking into stuff.
I thought you meant like after the movie, you were at the internet and... Well,
and you might get the odd one, which is like pay everything or $11,000, and only one person gets it, and blah blah blah. But a lot of them are $2,000 to $3,000 scholarships.
Yeah, I don't know what the actual, exchange for or adjustment for inflation would be on $2,000 from.
But they also said a soda was 10 cents.
A Coke was a dime, yeah.
A Coke was a dime. So if you look now, go to McDonald's, it'll still be like $1.60. So you have to say 16 times.
So $2 for a Coke. It's roughly $2 for a Coke.
So 20 times. So we're looking at the scholarships we have nowadays should be 40 grand based off of the inflation that we're seeing here.
That's a pretty generous community organization giving him that much money to...
Especially since it was an arcade.
Well, no, it was...
Well, it was the Buffaloes, they said.
Yeah, they ran the arcade, but it was like a lodge, right? Like it was a Rotary Club or something.
Buffalo Lodge. They were about to invade the Cro-Magnons.
Yes.
Or something like that. The tree people.
I recently reread, and Dustin read for the first time, the Flintstones comic book by Mark Russell, which if you haven't read, you should.
Maybe you could get it at Audible. No, it's not there. Probably.
Because audiobooks, just audiobooks.
That would have almost been a good segue.
Almost.
But not quite.
I said we were going to have awkward segues. So, I'm thinking there's not much more to talk about, unless you want to talk about cars.
I don't care about cars at all. But I do think that an exposed engine is definitely something you're not going to see nowadays.
Hey man, I'm sorry if I scared you.
You're gonna have to do one hell of a lot more than that to scare me.
Yeah, but looking all over for you, man. Didn't nobody tell you I was looking for you?
Hey, I can't keep track of all you punks running around here backwards.
Hey, you're supposed to be the fastest thing in the valley, man, but that can't be your car. It must be your mama's car. I'm sort of embarrassed to be this close to you.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised driving a field car.
Field car? What's field car?
Field car runs through the fields, drops cow shit all over the place to make the lettuce grow.
That's pretty good. Hey, I like the color of your car there, man. What's that supposed to be? Sort of a cross between piss yellow and puke green, ain't it?
Well, you call that a paint job, but it's pretty ugly. I bet you got to sneak up on the pumps just to get a little air in your tires.
Well, at least I don't have to pull over to the side, just let a funeral go by, man.
Oh, funny. You know what?
Your car's uglier than I am. That didn't come out right.
All right, well, let's wrap up the discussion segment of the program and move on to the judgment phase. Dustin, I feel that anyone listening should have a sense of where this is going to go for you. Do you feel American Graffiti is a masterpiece or a museum piece?
This is a nostalgia film. You went on and on about that. Anytime I'd complain about something, you'd say it was a different time. That is not something that's timeless. That is, as you said, it's a slice of life, in a slice of history, in a slice of Americana. Just here's a little part somewhere, middle of nowhere. And most of what's, like, the direction is good, sure. The sound is great, sure. But what's going to live on? What's the reason why anyone would watch it nowadays? It's not going to be the plot. The idea of somebody leaving high school not knowing necessarily what they want to do, yes, that's fairly universal. And I think they didn't really do much with that. They have a couple scenes where it matters, but otherwise they're just tooling around being assholes.
Hashtag memoir title.
And nostalgia does not a masterpiece make. That is something that belongs in a museum. If I wanted to look at something to represent 50s, 60s culture, lifestyle in this specific part of the world, sure, but that's not something that carries forward that's going to matter to most anyone else except for people looking back at history, the historian crew. And as we all know, with my review of 2001, technical achievement does not a masterpiece make either. So looking at the plot and what feelings it evokes or doesn't evoke, it is a museum piece. It just hides out in the museum for anyone who cares about this slice of life in America. And that is probably the wordiest I've been on the summary at the end that I've been for a while. And Mike, care to disagree?
I think being wordy is fine, considering...
That means that I have to justify myself?
No, considering I think you sort of struggled to get a word in edgewise during our Sherlock Holmes discussion.
Or the beginning of this one, you'll notice when editing, probably.
I really liked this movie. I wasn't sure what I was going to get going into this movie. I'm often surprised watching movies that I had connections to. You know, The French Connection was a movie that I loved. Not so much now. We've had a few other films like that. Sixth Sense. This whole process doing this podcast, man, it's been kind of an education, and we're looking at films differently. And I honestly wasn't sure American Graffiti was going to survive, because it is such a slice of Americana.
So niche.
It is so, like I said, white, suburban, middle class America experience. Southern California. I was really surprised. I was really surprised how much I appreciated it, how much I felt like Lucas managed to transport me into that experience. You know, there were some things that I thought were sort of questionable behaviors, but they were appropriate for the time, and I thought there was just enough agency in, you know, all the characters who could be in more of a vulnerable or victimized position, that they weren't victimized ultimately. And, you know, yeah, these are teenagers. They're trying to get on with each other, and there's a couple of scenes where people
threaten to shout rape.
You know, Steve makes a move, Terry makes a move. They don't force themselves on them, and things go badly or go well or however. Anyways, it's a charming movie. It's a real movie. It reminds me a little bit of Dazed and Confused or Fast Times at Ridgemont High, where the humor plays with genuine drama. The honesty of the direction and the sound mixing and the sound design and the set design and the locations that they're using. I just found that walking out of this movie, I really, really liked it. I think it's one of my favorite Lucas films ever. I would almost even put this above Star Wars, just for being the exact opposite of Star Wars and being able to achieve something on both a narrative level and a technical level. You know, at least Star Wars has a plot to drive it. Whereas this movie doesn't. This movie is very much about the characters. And so at the end of the day, I'm voting masterpiece. I agree with Roger Ebert. This is such an acutely genuine, perfect sort of slice of this time and this geographical area, this period, and it's very well put together, and I can't fault it.
And I agree with every single critic and director on the Sight and Sound poll for not voting for it. Take that, Ebert.
And you know what? I also want to qualify. I am not at all surprised this is not on the Sight and Sound and exclusively on the AFI, because it is the American Film Institute, and this movie is so American.
Which, funny enough, is an argument in favor of it not being a masterpiece, given that it's become so niche. I feel a masterpiece should be a bit more universal.
Mr. Hoity-toity over here.
That's me. Highbrow all the way.
I guess we can just agree to disagree.
So that's how we came down on American Graffiti. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it, or about our comments on the film.
Or about George Lucas, because that'll upset Mike.
Hey, I would love to talk about George Lucas any day of the week, 24/7. No, not 24/7. But you know what? I'd love to. Let's talk about George Lucas, not in a Star Wars context. And by the way, judging by the way things have been going lately, I think Lucas got out of the Star Wars business just in time.
Some would argue 3 movies too late. That is another discussion.
So throw us some comments, throw us some opinions on our YouTube channel. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Like, share, follow, subscribe to our social media. Keep up to date with all the goings on. We are on WordPress. We have a blog on WordPress, wordpress.com/FYC show. And we also have a Patreon campaign, which is patreon.com/FYC show. If you want to support the show financially, if you want to throw us a buck, or I believe it goes up to $20. And as Dustin said earlier, as I say always, apparently, we keep the lights on.
And, of course, you could do so for free at audibletrial.com/FYC show. Snag yourself a free book, not pay a dime.
30-day free trial, no commitment.
And so coming up next week, we should have another episode of All Things Considered.
Woo-woo!
Where we won't be going to the theaters this time. We'll be looking at a movie released recently in North America that's been around in Japan for a little bit.
Actually, I don't think it has had a North American release.
No?
Not theatrical. It was released last year in Japan, but I think it's only been released on home video here and maybe played kind of the odd festival. I don't think it's had like an official, even a small release theatrically.
Either way, Takashi Miike's 100th feature film, Blade of the Immortal. And, of course, later on that week, our recommend show. Yeah,
because we've split the All Things Considered into kind of a 2 episodes in that week program, and we will let you guys know what movies we're covering on our double feature recommend show during the Blade of the Immortal show.
Or worst case scenario, you can see it in the title, probably.
But I think it's probably going to be Lovely Bones and All-Star Superman.
Probably.
So
Not that we planned this out in advance.
So until then, thank you guys so much for joining us. We appreciate you listening to us as always. Your time is valuable. We're thrilled that you're letting us take it up, use it up.
Waste it.
I just remembered you're trying to say Mycroft. You're like, Mycroft, Laracroft, Bancroft.
He's too easily amused sometimes. It's like you were the one who was high today.
Be sure to join us next week when we're going to have another great, scintillating, cinematic conversation. And we'll see you then.
So until next time, I've been your host, Dustin Friesenad.
And I've been Mike Josick. And this has been For Your Consideration.
Take care.
I don't know if it's cloudy or bright. I only have eyes for
Trying something new today.
What?
You're trying something new.
I just forgot the way I normally said it.